and just talk about how it transpired from a Reddit comment thread to a real life acquisition, and then how Gabe built, a sourcing engine that he's turned into a $500 million empire now.
I think all the challenges we had ultimately were seated in this idea that you weren't trying to buy a business when I told you to buy us on Reddit, and we weren't trying to sell a business until I told you to buy us on Reddit.
All right, well, this is the most exciting episode of SourceCo sessions yet for me, because today I've got Gabe Galvez, the former owner of Captarget, the current CEO, and we're here today to announce the SourceCo acquisition of Captarget, and just talk about how it transpired from a Reddit comment thread to a real life acquisition, and then how Gabe built, a sourcing engine that he's turned into a, $500 million empire now. So on that note, really happy to introduce Gabe Galvez, and happy to have you here today.
Happy to have met you on Reddit all those months, or now maybe years ago.
Yeah, well, look, very excited. Maybe you could just do kind of a quick 30-second introduction on yourself, very high level of, what you've done, what you're doing, and then we can dive in.
Sure. My background is kind of 50-50 finance and entrepreneurial. I've built and exited a handful of companies that I've either been on the founding team or co-founded. My first one being when I was like 23, something like that, which was in a very private equity boring space, in the food co-packing space. I served as a CFO for a family office-backed buy and build strategy. I've been a licensed investment banker, checked a bunch of those boxes. I like to think that I've sat on all sides of this sort of entrepreneurial deal table, which is probably a weird shape for a table, right? I've been the founder, seller. I have been the intermediary doing the sell side work. I've been the buy side professional. I've been the GP of a fund acquiring those companies, and a few other iterations in between. So we've kind of seen it all, but have spent the last almost 15 years focused on the sourcing side of private equity back office services, primarily at Captarget, and a couple of our related sister companies that we founded along the way. GP Partners being a sort of captive buy-side turned merchant bank, and another company called Merger Labs that was acquired some years ago that was one of the first full-service digital agencies serving the private equity vertical.
And what are you spending your time on now?
I move cars. Just a lot of moving of cars. Time, post-COVID time is all a blur, but right around 2020, myself and my now business partner and GP in my fund, Verde Equity Partners, we started acquiring companies with our own balance sheets. It's sort of a quasi-family office kind of play, little multi-family office. We had a diversified portfolio perspective. We were buying real estate. We were doing early stage. We were doing some more conventional PE type work, down market, lower middle market work. And we really enjoyed doing that, but ultimately, kind of ran out of our own dry powder. We had some capabilities, but not enough to scale to major critical mass. And ultimately we founded Verde Equity Partners, which is primarily operates out of a classically structured committed fund structure that invests in the property services space. And that's diversifying as we move into our next fund cycles, our next investment cycles, which we're heavily focused on now. So the long answer to your short question is running a private equity fund. That's what we do now. And the through line here with that whole funny story, that multifaceted story, is at the end of the day, it's always been about you can't play the game unless you've got the ball. And for us, deal flow, the ability to source at scale, the ability to build pipeline at scale has functionally been the ball that has allowed me to walk on the court and force myself into a game.
Yeah. That's really cool. And I think that's almost the dream story for a lot of people that get into sourcing, is to eventually, be the kind of GP in some capacity, right? I think a lot of people that get into sourcing traditionally very entrepreneurial, so it's a natural kind of progression, but because of the difficulty, very few are able to make that. So it's always cool to be able to engage with someone that has. And I always think back, so Gabe and I originally met commenting on a Reddit, on the private equity subreddit, commenting on a thread about origination and what still worked. And I think there was a little bit of back and forth in that thread that resulted in me just DMing him and saying, hey, you clearly kind of know a little bit about origination. That's the business that I'm in. I would love to connect. And next thing you know, after one phone call, I quickly booked a flight to San Diego from Columbus, where I live, and spent 2 days with Gabe. And that was the start of kind of the entire conversation. But, the private equity subreddit has been a great resource for me. And I know that you kind of have a little bit of a reputation and a community following on it. So would love to hear it. One, your backstory with that subreddit, but two, how do you feel about how this kind of relationship transpired from there?
I mean, I feel like it's very fitting. I think it tracks with my whole, zany story. I don't know. I feel like I have a very unconventional story. It probably doesn't sound that way from the outside in, but it's taken a long time and a lot of work to get some structure to it that even makes sense, right? I think the private equity subreddit is a great example of this idea that real value lives in some of these platforms. I'm not a huge, more agnostic social media guy. I don't really have a social presence. I don't find a lot of value in it, but I like these, internet-based social functions that are curated around expertise or around the exploration of that expertise. And I think the private equity subreddit is a great example of what that is, right? It's maybe, anecdotally, right? It's like 50% people who don't know anything about anything, but are looking to learn and have come to what they perceive as a high quality source. Maybe 20% people who've already done it, and the rest people who are living through it right now. And it really creates this nice platform for exploring ideas, for best practices conversations, which is kind of where our connection first came to be, and a bunch of other things. Just as a fun aside, that subreddit, Verde's most recent associate hire came from that subreddit, from a post that was one line long that just said, I'm looking for an associate who wants to move to San Diego. And we found a bunch of amazing candidates, and we found one who moved to San Diego. Shout out to Campbell. We've sourced LPs on Reddit, right? Call that accidentally or as a byproduct of some other stuff. But because I'm trying to engage in that best practices conversation meaningfully while still having fun on there, we had a moment where we were chasing a close and we had an LP pull out at the last second, and we needed to fill a hole. Not a huge hole, but a couple $1 million hole. And I don't believe you can directly solicit investment there, and I don't believe that's what we were doing. But I mentioned, I'm trying to solve this problem for this deal. And wouldn't you know it, a day later, we were on the phone with some principals of it's called a little hedge fund. And the next day they funded us, right? So anytime somebody goes to any of these kind of industry or use case specific subreddits and makes the claim that this is mostly noise, I really think it's an inappropriate claim, right? I found the acquirer to my business, LPs who write 7-figure checks, and team members who've stuck around and proven to be really valuable on that subreddit. All well, I'm kind of just like flaming people, right? We have fun there. This is not like entirely academic, entirely esoteric talk. This is me saying, you don't know how this works and calling people names to an extent, right? In a good spirit, but it's a rough and tumble environment of deal makers really trying to figure it out in real time. And I love what's come from that environment.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact comment thread that we engaged on, but my first message to was, I appreciate the banter. So I'd imagine that there was some back and forth. But I'm in some of the boat. We've got clients. I made some great connections from that subreddit. There is a lot of just, how do I break into private equity? But there's also a lot of people that read that for real value. So it's cool, for me and for this story, right, to tell, because, we're in the business of people doing deals that come from unique circumstances, a phone call, an email, a letter, and, a Reddit comment thread is just an extension of that. You'll never know, where you'll find value in life and meet, somebody that can create what for you wasn't a life-changing moment, but it was the right next step for something that you built.
Yeah, agreed. And, I think back to that original comment connection, this might not be verbatim, but I know in our own DM back and forth, we got to this place where you kind of said, because obviously the platform is anonymous, and I don't think any of us have hardcore anonymized profiles, but we're not, our usernames aren't there, right? And we don't really self-identify in that capacity. And you sent me a note that said something like, I'm pretty sure I know who you are, just based on how niche some of this feedback was. And I wrote you back and said, I'm pretty sure I know who you are. And that led to, you saying, well, can I call you? And I dropped you my cell phone number, and 10 minutes later you called me, and we spoke for a couple hours. And I think the outcome there was just a light bulb moment for me, that there was another individual or another group out there that understood sourcing, saw sourcing through the same lens as we did, in a very, very niche application and a very, very technical perspective, right? And this is not to beat up on that community. Again, there's a lot of broad sort of catch-all. How do I break in? How do I find a deal? These are great places to start that discussion. We don't really live in that level of discussion at this point. But to be able to find an audience for very technical conversations about the technology side of the distribution of the messaging, about the conversion rates, about the value of the data, which is really the core of where we connected, right? It wasn't about, I have a company that's for sale and you guys are looking to acquire companies. You're not, SourceCo is not a professional acquirer of businesses like a PE fund. Captarget was not in the market, although everything is for sale, and being a deal guy, I consider myself, in the market all the time. But once you find that overlap in understanding that this is actually a conversation about data at scale, not a conversation about finding a good deal, right? I mean, that's a byproduct of the data conversation. It's still very valuable, but that's where we really started to build something, right? This isn't, can we find a deal and what deals have you closed? This is about, how do we think about the value of what we used to call at Captarget, the sawdust, right? All the pieces of the wood that have fallen to the floor as we chop or saw away for our clients looking for deals, became a business thesis in and of itself, which was really, really cool. And I know somewhere at the end of that call, maybe it was a follow-on call, but I feel like it happened pretty early in our discussion. I just consider myself sort of a straight shooter, maybe a little on the cavalier side of straight shooting. I'm trying to have fun here and not, die at a desk. I just said, maybe you should buy this business. Why don't you buy this business? And you said, well, what did that look like? And I gave you a framework and a valuation perspective, and just said, if you agree with that, let's figure it out. And
I booked a flight like 5 minutes.
You booked a flight, and you agreed to it a couple of days later, and it took us a while to figure it out.
That's a lesson for, like, when I always say, like, what makes some of our clients, better at closing deals than others. I say the people that
get on the plane
the fastest are always good at closing deals. There's just
100%.
We can't replicate that human connection. But I couldn't agree more, right? I think any relationship where it's like built on a technical, deep understanding of the problem you're trying to solve, and you've had we had different approaches to the same problem, and we provide different services. But it was something where I immediately saw the combination being greater than the sum of the parts, and that's always really exciting to me. So I guess maybe you could just let's rewind and talk about how you started Captarget 15 years ago when sourcing wasn't as competitive as it is now. There weren't a million buy-side firms popping up every week, and you really had to define the market that you were going into and build it as you were figuring out what you guys did and how you did it.
Yeah, like many founders' origin stories, there wasn't a super fully baked strategy or long-term vision. Myself and Captarget's original co-founder, Paul Sadowitz, worked together at an investment banking group, and we're sort of, fantasizing about what's next. It's a challenging job. Anybody who's been on the sell side has lived through that. I had already lived through an exit or two by then and had some flexibility and a slightly different perspective on what solving the what's next question might look like. And the very first iteration of the business was more on the back office outsourced analyst side of the equation, primarily with sell side advisors and investment banks. I remember very distinctly, we were in Vegas looking at a deal, and we were sitting at the MGM, and Final Four was on, and Paul was with me, and I'm not sure why he was there, or one of us. Maybe I shouldn't have been there. I don't know, but it seemed odd that both of us were on this little deal that didn't need a bunch of boots on the ground. We had some MDs there, whatever. And I kind of looked at him and was like, "Why are you here, dude?" And he kind of said, "Honestly, I don't know. Like, with the amount of time I waste, I could probably do this job for 3 or 4 investment banks at one time, and nobody would know I had 3 or 4 jobs." Just in jest, right? This was not us scheming or anything. This was just a funny sitting at the bar in Vegas moment. And I took a beat and said, "Well, what if I got you 3 or 4 groups to pay you for some fractional version of your role here?" He was the director of research. "Would you do it?" And, he's a show me the money guy. He's like, "Yeah, if you can figure that out, good luck." And I pretty much quit my job the next day, maybe 2 days later, and decided to see if we could solve a problem around fractional resource allocation on the sell side. Again, mostly through the analyst lens. And at the time, there was no outsource. I mean, outsourced was a bad word at the time. Now the market's very different. Of course, we're in a different service category now as well. But we started doing outsourced analyst work, just good old fashioned building lists, writing sims, building models, just the grunt work. Came up with a little recurring revenue kind of model with some restrictions. And we built that business for a handful of years. But ultimately, we decided to pivot based on just some really basic economic considerations, right? When you sell stuff to sell side advisors, sell a service, you're asking them to give you their last dollar, right? They get a retainer. They need to figure out how to take this deal to market and survive off that retainer until they close a bigger deal, especially with lower middle market groups. It's a little more hand to mouth. And we're asking them for thousands of dollars a month to do their work. And it was a difficult ask. So we thought about sourcing after asking the question, who can we sell something to that will pay us with money that's not theirs? That's all we were trying to do, right? We're just trying to reduce the friction of separating the client from their money while providing a service. And really quickly, the buy side became the apparent alternative, right? You have private equity groups that are paying for sourcing, usually at the SourceCo level. At least it's a recastable expense, or it's not a fixed Manco expense. It was just less their money. And, of course, private equity professionals are incentivized to deploy capital. So our incentives were a little more aligned, and pretty quickly we leaned into this deal origination model. In fact, as we started doing sourcing work, of course, Google Ads and SEO in the time was a lot more directly critical to our own lead flow. We couldn't afford any of the buy-side keywords. We were a tiny little company. So we had to start calling it something else, right? We made a very deliberate decision about a decade ago to start calling what we were doing, which was then called, buy-side advisory work, or, private equity finder fee or finder work. We started calling it deal origination. And I'm not saying we're the first people to use that term, but we were really the first to commercialize that as a descriptor for a service. And we did it because we couldn't afford to call it anything else, because nobody was bidding on the term deal origination. And now when you go on, r/private equity, every other post is about deal origination strategies, right? So I'd like to think we had a little say in even shaping sort of the lexicon that describes what we do. For a period of time, we did both services. We had sort of a sell side back office and a buy side back office. The buy side back office was more profitable, a little easier to scale. But the real switch came when we started doing our own deals through another company, GP Partners, that we founded separately. And it really showed us the value of the data, right? To be able to generate a 2 to 5% fee on a $20 to $100 million revenue business became really meaningful to us. And we had the ability to scale that effort, maintain a healthy client base, maintain these two separate entities. But over time, they kind of started to converge. We were doing deals over here at GP. We were reinvesting our fees and building a little balance sheet for ourselves. Captarget's clients were paying us to find those deals, which of course they owned, and that was their own pipeline. But there was a lot of synergies in finding our clients deals and finding us deals. And of course, fast forward to now, ultimately that synergy exists in me finding deals for my fund as a general partner. In the late 20-teens, we went all in on origination. We sunsetted our analyst service completely. We walked away from, at the time, about 50% of our revenue because we believed we could backfill with origination work quickly. Took about 4 months for us to backfill the lost MRR. So real quick proof, I think, there. And off we went. And, since then, through our deal shop, we've done some billions of dollars worth of transactions. And on the Captarget side, we've worked with 1,500 PE funds, something like that.
It's very cool. It's crazy. And I give you guys, the people here, the scale of what they were, Gabe was able to achieve at Captarget. They've historically closed now, I believe, north of about $8 billion in deal volume that they've sourced for their clients over the last 15 years. Now, one of the things that was really unique to me, we haven't really touched on, was when I first found out about Captarget, the fee model was so different. And maybe you could talk about how Captarget structured its fees, what made that unique, and how that's kind of found a niche for you within clients.
Sure. The model was really, really simple. And, Captarget is what we call a fee-for-service origination provider, meaning we don't take any variable upside. There's no finder's fee. There's no close fee. We're not a buy-side bank. We're just the top of funnel, right? I like to say we bring the horse to water. If the horse drinks, the horse doesn't drink and dies there. If it's an ugly horse, that's nothing to do with us, right? We're just there to empower that top of funnel next step. We did that for a couple reasons. Number one, at the time, before we were doing our own deals and I got back into kind of a principal deal making capacity, getting variable comp is just lumpy, especially if you don't have scale. And I was a little bit sort of threadbare from the lumpiness of our sell side life. I didn't want to have to live and die by did that deal close. I wanted to have, 100 clients that pay us whatever, $3,000 a month, $5,000 a month. And I viewed it more as a SaaS play than as an extension of a buy-side firm or a modern take on a buy-side firm. And for a while, we really competed against buy-side firms. I think to an extent we still do. There's a certain type of customer, especially now with fundless sponsors, with independent sponsors, whatever the term we want to use, that extra 2, 3, 4, 5 points of enterprise value paid to a finder could go in their pocket. And that's meaningful to them. Or bridge the gap between what they can do and what the seller needs. So there was a whole sort of sub-industry of folks that didn't want to pay deal fees and just needed lead flow. And that's really where we came in.
We could never work with them, right? Because we have so much riding uncertainty and close and the ability for our clients to do deals. It's really hard because the demand for our services exceeds our ability to supply it. We've always been selective about only working with, private equity funds, their platform companies, or corporates. And so we've never really regularly worked with independent sponsors or search funds or this whole growing category because it just doesn't fit our model.
Well, and for us, there was a scale issue that we saw at a conventional buy-side firm that we didn't want to opt into, right? I mean, to your point, SourceCo, as an example, by definition, only wants to work with so many clients. You don't want to have hundreds of clients. It just doesn't scale. There's a butts and seats component, although of course SourceCo is very tech enabled. There's still a butts and seats component. And you end up with some misaligned incentives. Not you, buy-side firm. SourceCo doesn't have this issue. But, if I have 3 clients all looking for, whatever, table manufacturers of a certain size in a certain geography, and I get a buy-side fee, I guarantee you who's going to see all the table deals? The guy who's paying me the biggest fee, at least as a step one, right? And it's really hard to scale and democratize the value of lead flow if you're getting upside. So we just wanted to remove ourselves from that and say, hey, this is a volume game for us to an extent. And we wanted our clients, the professional buyers, ability to close to be solely theirs, right? We don't control their perspective on value, their close rates, their value prop in the market, their ability to woo a seller. That has nothing to do with us, right? That's completely above our pay grade. What we can control is the mechanism in which the top of the funnel gets filled. And by not taking any variable comp in any deals, it allowed us to just eliminate most, if not all, of those funky incentives and allowed us to scale without having any conflict. Because now when that table searcher calls us, we can say, yeah, we're doing work right now, but you own your leads. Your leads are derived from your value proposition being disseminated into the market, right? Because we do outreach as our client, which is important. So SourceCo or a buy-side firm is going to be doing that outreach as them, right? That content or that messaging might look like, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I represent the top 3 buyers of table companies in the US, and I'd love to learn more about you to see if one of them might want to buy you, which is fine. But our strategy is reaching out as that buyer, whether it's as an alias of theirs, a spoofed identity of theirs, as an extension of their team, but we're still calling as them. And that does one thing that is mission critical. It creates this express ownership of the lead on day one. Because I'm not calling and saying I work with a bunch of buyers. I'm saying I'm calling and I work for Verde, and Verde wants to buy you. And if they want to sell to Verde based on what they see online, what they've read, what the team communicates to them, that's a Verde lead, right? We're not shopping these leads. In the context of shopping, we're not warehousing these leads. Obviously, we're working on our own data warehousing project for a different reason. And again, it kind of democratized this whole idea of what if you're paying one group, or what if a lot of firms are paying one group to do functionally the same thing across a bunch of different verticals. So really, really unique business model. And I think now one of the reasons why we really like this partnership, this acquisition we've lived through with SourceCo, is now we effectively have the entire spectrum of economic models covered, right? We have at GP Partners a no retainer, pure play, pure upside buy-side firm. Consider that the right end of the spectrum, pure play upside. In the middle, we have the SourceCo model, where there's a recurring revenue component, there's an upside component, there's some selectivity about clients, but there's still a little more scale than what you would see on the GP Partners side. And then all the way to the left end of the spectrum, you have Captarget, which is pure play per pay to play, no upside, and a fixed cost. So now a buyer can come into our now collective ecosystem of companies and really self-identify with what economic model makes sense for their strategy. Or if they're a really active buyer, utilize multiple, portco services for all portcos of SourceCo's holdco, and really play that game as well and pick up some synergies along the way. So I think it's an important question. It was a good thing for us to touch base on. I always thought the two things that made Captarget unique were that economic model, and the value of the data, right? This has never been a company where we've tried to maximize our own EBITDA. This has been a company that we've tried to create heavy defensibility, and it's been around for 15 years through a bunch of disruption, ups, downs, tech disruption, et cetera, and monetize the data while maintaining that certain level of resilience. And it's been really, really fruitful.
That quickly, because I think just listening to you, there's probably some confusion among our readers in that, like, how did you go from, not collecting any success fees and just working on this, fee for service model to going and doing, 13, 14 million dollars a year in EBITDA from success fees?
So good question. Totally worth a point of clarity. So these were separate companies, right? We had a little family of companies at one point with GP Partners, Merger Labs, and Captarget, and then Merger Labs was acquired and it was GP Partners and Captarget. GP Partners is a conventional buy-side firm, and it is very selective about who it works for because we don't charge retainers. We didn't charge retainers at the time. We still don't. So that means we pick and choose our clients, right? We want to work with the highest close rate, the most aggressive buyers, the buyers whose theses or mandates align best with the data that we have available. But similar to this sort of economic ecosystem I described where SourceCo, GP, and Captarget live, at one point it was just two ends of that spectrum. So a client could come in to our broader ecosystem, and if they were to say to us, we never pay retainers, we don't carry fixed costs. Well, if they met a certain threshold for qualification, we could handle them on the GP partner side and just charge them the success fee. If they came in and said, we never pay upside, we just need a biz dev function, a corp dev function, we could put them in the Captarget side and capture that retainer. So it allowed us to kind of serve both ends, extreme ends of this market that we see through different entities with different teams. They were very separate for a long period of time. But as an owner, it created this awesome de-risk proposition where I could afford to run a buy-side firm that never charged any upfront fees, which normally would just come out of our pocket because we had the cash flow from Captarget. And conversely, Captarget could exist being nominally profitable and not really focused on growth because all the big upside came from our buy-side firm, right? So that really exists to serve ownership and stakeholders at that point. But it was a nice way for us to de-risk these two realities, one being it's really expensive to run a fee-only buy-side firm at scale, and the other being, it's actually pretty hard to scale a specialty lead gen, specialty origination company, especially pre-AI, and pick up, gains in profitability and EBITDA at scale. So it's kind of how we address this fundamental issue that we had as ownership.
And that was always an issue for us growing because we had two growth flags to revenue. One was the M&A cycle. Like, if I hire someone today, they're not going to produce a success fee for best case scenario, probably 6 months. Although we have somebody working on beating that right now, but realistically 9 to 12 on average, especially as we were growing and still didn't have the business model, the client base, the deals, the infrastructure that we have now. And so we had that M&A lag, but we also had the technology costs where we had to invest in technology that was a cost center until we had enough scale where, the technology helped enable that scale and enable a higher margin, but we needed the revenue behind that. And so it was a difficult business to grow from a cash flow perspective. And we're truly just starting to round that corner now because the M&A pipeline takes so long to develop and we spent so much and invested so much in our team and technology. So it was really interesting to see how you approached that problem without really recognizing it was a problem. It was kind of the natural discourse. So it was really exciting when we first connected for me to understand that it wasn't only me having those problems, and then other people were finding creative solutions to them. But to continue this, so you went from then starting to collect fees to rolling fees and then becoming your own GP and now managing hundreds of millions of dollars. So maybe you could talk about that process.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was not particularly strategic. I think a lot of this was, I don't want to say accidental, but we were working with what was being put in front of us. A deal, a role opportunity, an interesting thesis we heard from somebody else that we happened to know something about. But it did start with fee roll, right? I mean, earning buy-side fees for any of the buy-side guys listening is not tax efficient. I'm based in California. If you're making $10 million worth of EBITDA derived from fees and you own half the company or whatever, as a hypothetical, I mean, you're going to be paying 50+% in taxes. And eventually, you don't need the cash flow anyway, right? It just becomes this tax headache. So we had this perspective at some point where we thought, well, if we don't need the cash, let's start working with groups that will allow us to roll or co-invest as much of our fee basis as possible. There's a tax deferred component there. Obviously, it becomes much more tax efficient income at some point, assuming it's, long-term cap gain style income at some point. And it also gets us on the cap table of a bunch of funds that probably wouldn't want us anyway. At that point, we're already accredited investors. We're already doing some other similar investing. But, I mean, even with Verde, as it's small but growing, we're probably not going to have any new small LPs ever again, right? We'll continue to work with our initial LP base, and we'll take on some institutional anchors as we go. So it's a nice little hack to get us on the balance sheets of, or the LP pools of some big groups, right? To be able to invest alongside the Riverside team or the Alpine team. I mean, these are groups we look up to. It was a real hell of a little backdoor angle for us. And, those investments have been pretty accretive. We've started to see some of those exits occur. And it's really exceeded expectations. So once you don't need the cash, you start rolling all the cash.
And
once you start rolling all that cash.
Yeah, sorry. But, so if you had to guess, how much do you think you've rolled into deals in the last 7-8 years?
I'd probably have to do the math, but every chance we got, we rolled, right? I mean, and there are groups that have either governance limits to that ability for a third party to roll, or they just, the preference for them to not have a bunch of yahoos on their balance sheet. But the first deal we rolled, $250,000 of fees, and it effectively 10x'd in value, right? And that kind of lit up all our eyes, and we started asking everybody, can we roll? And it's turned into, a meaningful number. Again, I'd probably have to, I don't want to make any claims, but it's millions of dollars, right?
Yeah.
That, I mean, I joke now as a GP, which is something I really enjoy doing, but it's challenging work. There's only one job better than being a GP of a fund, I think. Job, loose term. And that's being an LP of a fund, right? Only one mechanism to make money. Oh, it's not a job. And it allowed us to skip that. And then as we talk about my progression into my GP role at Verde, it allowed us to skip some steps, right? Because as I went to market to build my GP team and my ops team, our ops team, not just my company, of course, we were able to go to market and say, we've done this successfully for thousands of firms. We are LPs in our own right, and we understand what matters to you, Mr. and Mrs. LP out there investing in, at the time, a first-time fund or some emerging managers. We wrote the best practices book on a bunch of niche little areas of this business that were valuable to our LPs. One of the biggest concerns with LPs that we see or we saw is first-time managers' ability to actually deploy capital, right? You don't want to earmark $50 million, $100 million, and then nothing happens. That's almost worse than not doing a great deal and having to fix it later. So by us being able to go there to the capital markets and say, we've done this for all the big firms. We've co-invested with the big firms. We have some track record of picking and choosing within our own ability to do so within our fee role. I think it really helped us establish ourselves as having a good understanding of at least the top of funnel, or the foundation, depending on how you look at it, of a private equity investor, right? Finding good deals, understanding how to execute, understanding how to scale, and doing it in a cost beneficial way, which for a first time or emerging manager matters, right? Saving 1 or 2 points by not paying the buy side for every single deal you do helps me pay pref, goes into LP's pockets, ultimately should go into ours, if we play our cards right. So in a lot of ways, that funny little accidental moment of Paul and I sitting at a bar in Vegas wondering about how we could better work in the back office of groups at scale became really the only reason I have a seat at the table now. I mean, of course, I'd like to think I'm a competent professional and an expert in a couple little areas of this business, but the reality is I don't have that classic ladder, history that leads to that GP position, right? I was not an analyst for a bunch of years. I was for a little bit. I built and sold my first company in my 20s. Then I became a CFO of a family office doing buy-side work. Then I became a banker. It was all very backwards, and I wouldn't have done it another way. Again, it wasn't deliberate. I was just trying to, not go hungry in the street, whatever, just have a job and continue to learn and try to develop some expertise. But I made a comment about, at the end of the day, the deal is the ball, right? And to really, belabor that analogy, look, like maybe I wasn't great at basketball, but if all the guys are hanging out on the court and they don't have a ball, they're going to let me play.
Yeah.
Because they'd rather play with me than not play at all. And that's kind of where we're at today.
Yeah, I think it's funny because we both have very non-typical backgrounds in terms of how we got into finance, and I was thrust in a similar way when we started the independent sponsor. And I think atypical to most sponsors, right? We were going directly to the pension funds, oftentimes directly to the family offices for capital, and I would get dragged along. Right? I'm like, why am I here when I have some team members that have these unimpeachable, incredible track records, and the thing that always struck out to me was how valuable even the LPs would say, where'd you get this deal? Can you get more of them? And it's very much that, right? Is this an relationship I can invest in that's going to grow and allow me to put more capital in attractive situations and more attractive situations out the door? And I realized very early on that, to your point, like, you can't play the game without the deal. And, everyone wants to play the game right now. So if you can control the deals, you have this huge amount of leverage over the rest of the situation. So I find it just fascinating. And maybe we could take that now, as we've got a pretty good grasp on your story, and just dive into a little bit about sourcing, right? Your sourcing history, what happened, what worked, how Captarget worked, what made you good at sourcing? Because I was just looking through this. Even now, last year you sourced 7,843 what we determine qualified leads, so a company for sale. How has sourcing changed? How did you start? What do you see now? Would love to dive into that.
I know we were talking about this maybe the other day, but the growth in professional acquirers, let's not say private equity because it's hard to define, sponsors, corp dev departments of larger, corporate entities, committed private equity funds, SPVs, whatever, catch all, is tens of thousands
Keep going.
of participants.
I'm looking for a board.
So, in 2005, that number was like 3,000. Now, and again, anecdotally, because it's a difficult thing to measure, but that number is probably 25,000 now. And aggregate deal volume in the States, at least, hasn't grown that much. Value has, aggregate value, because there are just a lot more buyers buying about the same amount of inventory that's existed for the last 20 years in the space. So, of course, values have been pushed up. So when we think about what's changed, number one, there's a lot more folks hunting and farming in the space. When we started, we were all email outreach, and email worked back then. Compliance was a little bit less of a concern, and a lot of groups were using pre-existing kind of retail tech stacks. And we were for a minute. Took about 2 days for us to get banned from some of them, but it's the nature of the beast as we're learning. So when we started, we were just trying to send email at scale. And one of the nice things about doing this kind of work is, to an extent, it's less compliance heavy because you're not selling anything, right? I'm reaching out as a principal buyer. I'm trying to give you, Mr. or Mrs. Business Owner, millions of dollars, right? I'm not asking for anything beyond the opportunity to talk. And that simple fact made the early email outreach fairly easy. I think our first tests were on MailChimp back in the day, like old school, just buying retail credits on MailChimp and sending clients emails, trying to spoof a plain text email, trying to make it look top to top, trying to game the deliverability in the moment. Obviously, that was not a scalable solution. I think I'm banned for life for MailChimp, which, what are you going to do?
We can talk about all the services Captarget got banned from over the years.
Oh, sure. We're banned from and I'm banned from a couple personally. I mean, I think MailChimp's up there. CapIQ's probably up there. But we had to solve for sort of two problems initially. One being email deliverability when we were email only, right? Now, of course, we have call center component, it's a multi-pronged approach. The other was the data reselling component, right? Are we selling lists of data that come from other systems, and are we empowering a client to not buy that data from its data source? And we had to develop at the time, now it's basically a moot point, but at the time we had to develop some, great data sharing agreements. We had to develop some really meaningful partnerships. Once upon a time, we were a big CapIQ back office until they kicked us out the door. They thought we were
I think this is all
redistributing.
This sums up, right? There wasn't a Grata or a SourceCo you could subscribe to. And I always
Neither existed.
Yeah, the first database I used was one a guy named Brian McManus told me about years ago for sourcing. It's called Reference USA. It's free with a library card, but it's similar. Just it's a tax ID database.
Yep.
And so I would scrape that as my first data source. In the 2000 teens, and it worked, right? But it was really those SIC and NICS codes are always really broad, and you couldn't really, there was so many problems. Then you had to find contact information, and contact information wasn't as prevalent as it is now. So,
I'll touch on that too. We got wild with contact information.
Yeah,
I mean, it's before.
Sure, but you also used to be able to call offices in a way that you can't now. So, it's funny because, I've been in lead generation for so long, and the problems around lead generation have always changed. Or the solutions around them, but the problems are always the same, right? How do I identify? How do I engage? And it's really cool to see in this specific niche of small business deal sourcing or lower middle market deal sourcing, you've been there for this evolution of, the problem's always been there, but what's the solution? And obviously some people like SourceScrub and Grata have built real, big businesses off parts of it, but they haven't solved it.
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't need to become a remember when, but I remember the first iteration of PitchBook launching before there was private company data, or the Grata go-to-market splash. When we got kicked off of CapIQ once upon a time, we had to scramble and ended up with FactSet, who did have a redistribution sort of understanding. There was a lot of data chasing, and there was a lot of platform deliverability chasing. For us, the big challenges were those two buckets, right? It was source data, delivery mechanism, contact information. And way back then, from a contact information problem-solving standpoint, we were doing all the classic things you would do, right? So we were really solving for these three buckets of problems, right? Source data, distribution, deliverability, and contact information. Um, the deliverability piece has been solved over time by third-party wholesale vendors. We've built some technology in-house, and now there's some fairly easy solutions. The data side evolved over time, but again, now we have some great data partners like Grata and all of them, Zoom Info, and there's so many that support this type of work. But the real challenge when we were email only was email deliverability. And early on, we had made a promise that our email accuracy would be something like 90% or greater. And, in the moment, again, anecdotally, this is not specific numbers, but just if my memory serves, if we were to pull a screen out of CapIQ, let's say, not to beat up on CapIQ, but if you were to build a company screen in CapIQ, as an example, about 30% of the company entries would have a contact listed, an email listed. And about 30% of those were accurate. So now we're at, 0.3 times 0.3% pen rate, right? 9% accuracy rate in building a list. And they were about the best in the business at the time. And not an inexpensive solution for us having multiple seats and all that. It was a very different business in the moment. But so we had to start doing all the funny little things that we've probably all lived through now, but early on there wasn't really a precedent for, right? So we had to build our own, macro-driven in Excel name generators, where if we knew the CEO was Bob Smith, we would send Bob at bsmith at b.smith at roberts.smith at et cetera, et cetera. You get about 20 versions of every name. We would send those emails internally, basically looking for like a non-express opt-in, just trying to see who was out there shouting into the void. If it didn't bounce, there'd be some secondary screening processes. And at one point, we had a bunch of laptops running in a conference room.
Yeah, that's how
was like
verification worked
Yeah.
now, and now people charge you for that service, right? Like, no,
Exactly. We didn't have that then.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were doing it. I mean, we literally had a conference room filled with laptops running, very early kind of Excel automation, actually moving mice around on a laptop screen, typing emails and making errors so it looked like humans, and deleting and retyping. You could only send so many emails per account per day to do this testing. And we had to build this whole farm to do it. Ultimately, there was a server in that room, and we had to, we were home growing solutions that didn't exist that now, thankfully, the market has solved. That's not how we work anymore. There's no laptops in this conference room.
No, and I think we'll touch on the future of sourcing and what's changed since you started, but I always think it's good to just hear like a little bit about that. And when we met, one of the reasons I was excited about this business model is for a number. One, and I think they've all actually come to fruition after the kind of integration and acquisition, but a major one is, SourceCo invests a lot in content in developing lead funnels of potential clients, and we could only sign 1 out of every 10 interested clients because we're so restrictive about who we'll work for. And a lot of those people wanted, we built all this sourcing technology around data, around email reporting, and, invested so much in it. It felt like a disservice that we weren't able to use it for these people. And when we were able to, when I thought about the Captarget acquisition, it was, we get more value of our lead funnel, which means we can spend more on leads, which means we can serve more of the market, and those people can develop into real firms who we can eventually use at SourceCo, or they get their first platform done, and then we can use add-ons. So it was a really kind of synergist there. But the idea that I could get, maybe 15 years of origination data in one place, which has been so critical for us to be able to train models, to be able to learn off of. It just provided, we have 3 years of operating history. So we were able to get kind of the data that, we wouldn't have had access to otherwise, which really helped accelerate some of the things we were doing. But it was also this idea of having just a larger bench of resources, right? More of the ability to amortize our technology spend over a larger revenue pool, and a lot of what we've been working on both internally and in our integration is cold calling and really scaling that. And how do you build, and leverage AI to help you train, develop, monitor, and produce the best talent when it comes to that. Because everything we do, whether you're emailing on behalf of the firm or you're the buy side firm or you're the firm themselves, everything is designed getting them on the phone with the goal from the phone to get to meet in person, right? And I think that's been a huge, even for us in our evolution, calling has become more and more kind of a larger part of our organization. For you as well, it's your fastest growing revenue source at Captarget.
By a long shot.
Yeah. So I think it's been really exciting about, that was all what excited me, right? And I think it's pretty, clear that I wanted to try and recreate a lot of what you'd done in terms of just the empire that you'd built. And that, I always say, demonstrated the art of the possible for us, especially with, what we had built and continue to build on the technology side. But why in the world did you sell to me, a guy off a Reddit comment thread?
I mean, that's probably why. No, I think the shared valuing of the data and the mission to sort of build the deal flywheel that can be worth more than the sum of its parts was pretty unique, right? Plenty of people have looked at Captarget. We went through 2 PE processes, both of which we tanked at some point because they were just looking at our EBITDA and we weren't maximizing EBITDA. It didn't matter to us, right? We just wanted the company to continue to survive, to crank out data that we could monetize in some way. And I mean, there's a lifestyle component to the business. I mean, or it was an owner operator in that sense. It was not super focused on big growth for growth's sake. But the real short version is like, you got it. Nobody else got it. I'd have to sit down with other buyers, prospective buyers, and explain it to them, and it just wouldn't make any sense to them. And it immediately made sense to you, which I think is, the linchpin to the whole thing. That said, during the same time, that same era we're getting to know you, we looked at some other opportunities that were not similar, but shared some of the same DNA. A younger operator who's passionate about AI and data. Somebody who's been doing deals and understands that there's a competitive advantage to continue doing deals while having access to all this data, best practices, and scale. But, I think SourceCo and you as SourceCo's chief executive checked a couple boxes nobody else did. Number one, like, I don't want to say I want to do anything. I'm running a fund. It's a whole big thing. But I'm on the, let's call it, hopefully engineered back end of my career, right? I'd like to be really, really retired in the next 5 years, right? Whatever that means. I probably still have some roles, some groups, but I don't want to be generating earned income. I don't want to be, missing the opportunity to surf, to be on a call at 9 a.m. I hate that shit. So I think your passion, your enthusiasm, and your clarity of vision was really nice, right? Because these other groups didn't have that yet. They could probably develop that clarity of vision with me, but I don't think I'm the right person to develop it, right? I'm not deeply immersed in AI, although now our firm has adopted it and it's awesome. And I'm not in that place in my life where the incentives align to get me really excited about working really hard. And, for the audience, Tom is out there busting his ass every day. He works, 5 people's jobs simultaneously. I don't want to do that. I want to check the surf. I want to go to breakfast. I want to play Call of Duty. I want to throw the ball for my dog and add value where I can, but not habitually on the day-to-day basis. And everybody else we looked at needed more of a operational partnership out of me, which I wasn't really willing to give. So, and you guys have really supported that promise to not work me out of the business, but to just lever me for highest and best use and leave me alone the rest of the time, which I think is really valuable. But that also, selecting SourceCo as a seller also came with a bunch of unknown challenges that we ultimately resolved. But at its core, like I mentioned earlier, you're not a buyer of businesses. There's no fund to draw from. There's no specific mandate. There's no buy box.
And we were
There's
growing, so
yeah.
we were capital constrained at that, best case scenario, right?
Well, and focus challenge and all those things, right? You're a growing, capitalized startup. We are a steady state legacy business, and thankfully we have deal professionals on our team. You, of course, your partner Dan, a consummate deal professional. Obviously, I'm doing deals professionally as well. Or my old business partner Paul, who ultimately we bought out during this process. I bought out during this process in order to ultimately sell to you, which we could get into if anybody cares, just from a deal friction standpoint. But I think all the challenges we had ultimately were seated in this idea that you weren't trying to buy a business when I told you to buy us on Reddit. And we weren't trying to sell a business until I told you to buy us on Reddit. And we had to acclimate to that very quickly. And ultimately what that led to was a pretty prolonged process. Not super friction forward process, but it just took us a while because we weren't prepared on that day to go get into diligence and to go to market on the capital side and to continue to run your growing business while learning how to run our growing business, which started growing in the middle of our process after not growing for some years. So at its core, that was really the challenge. But along the way, I mean, all the things that could go wrong in a deal went wrong.
Oh yeah. I've been a part of not a huge number of deals from kind of a principal perspective, right? Either me buying or selling an asset, and but enough. And it was by far the craziest deal I've ever been involved in, and it wasn't the biggest, right? And that's always one of the more difficult things. And just from a SourceCo perspective, it was also it started at a time when we were doing really well from an operational and a cash position. And then we went on in the middle of it, SourceCo just went on a huge dry run where every deal that we looked at closing was blowing up left, right, center. And it's funny, as soon as this deal got done, then there was like an exodus of deals on the SourceCo side as well. But it was, the amount of curves and difficulties in this deal was astounding. I mean, to give you like an example, we thought we'd agreed to a purchase price. We had an investor that was going to give us the equity, and they just happened to get in a really bad car accident, almost cost them their life, went through a huge personal issue in the hospital that caused them to out of their control lose access to all of their liquidity. And we were just a small piece of that. So that right before we thought we were going to fund and sign, all the capital disappeared overnight. And that was not even one of the most difficult things that we had to deal with. So for me, it was kind of like it got to a point where every phone call was like, look, these are all the cards on the table. This is not us trying to make a deal on both sides. Like, we just have to figure this out as people that want to achieve this end goal. There's just going to be a lot of curves to get there.
Yeah, I mean, the half joke promise I made to SourceCo and to Tom was simply that I'd be the best seller they ever worked with, because I've worked with all the crazy sellers myself and didn't want to engineer any of those problems into our process. So we were pretty committed to doing the deal all along and pretty pregnant fairly early in the process. So we kind of were stuck with each other, which was not a bad thing, but I think it was pretty apparent that our incentives were pretty aligned early on. But just to further all the lumps, so SourceCo had its lead LP disruption in the middle of our process. At the time, our companies were owned by myself and my original co-founder, who I still own our legacy portfolio with. And, for a number of valid reasons, he decided he didn't want to sell to SourceCo, but he would sell to me. So we had to push pause on our whole deal. I had to engineer a buyout with him, which was not super complicated, but it's always more complicated than you think, right? Especially if it's your buddy and whatever. And we worked it out. It's fine. But I had to go through a whole cycle there while managing the business, so the bottom didn't drop out, so SourceCo would still want to buy it. Steady state the business after buying out my partner, reconvene with you guys, renegotiate the thing and sell the thing again to you, or go through the process again to you. during that time, I mean, the age-old adage remains true: time kills all deals.
That's when our investor blew off, is because
that's when you
from that, right?
exactly.
Like, it was one domino after another.
I mean, and in that process, we lost a couple key employees who, it was not a contentious thing, but just folks that said, hey, I don't know what's going on with this deal. It's taken 9 months. I got other plans. So we had to absorb some key employee change, most notably our COO, who I still work with in a different capacity, but didn't want to live through the uncertainty of that, which I'm totally empathetic to, along with some non-core rank and file folks. And right. It kept, we probably had at least a half dozen major disruptions. And that's before integration. And we all know that half of integrations fail, right? Ours has not. I think ours has gone as smoothly as an integration can go. And I think we can attribute that to 2 things. I think most notably to expectation management that we tried to keep pretty real, right? I've lived through enough total shit show integrations that I've led to be able to sit down with our team on day 1 and say, when this happens, here's everything that's going to accidentally go wrong. You're not going to get a paycheck because the paycheck company's not going to, the new company's not going to have your social right. You're going to feel, your benefits are going to be disrupted, and something's going to happen to somebody on that one day where there's accidentally no coverage, and we're going to have to figure it out. Yeah. Some of you are not going to like the new management style or culture, which turned out to not be the case. But these are the classic things. Tom's perfect. No, we don't have any friction there. But as an example, I really tried to set the bar low with our team and say, even if integrations go well, there's still a shit show. And ours wasn't a full-blown shit show, but all those classic things that went wrong. Thankfully, we're a small team. We're all from the deal world. We've solved them pretty quickly. But I think the big benefit to, or the big tool we've relied on to our integration, smoothing out our integration, has just been a high level of integrity and partnership that's remained really flexible, right? So that might mean, hey, the transition services agreement needs to be extended by a few months. That's fine, whatever. We have
to close with no cash at close, and you have to take a seller note.
We got to figure it out.
Yeah, that's the conversation that I was definitely the one I was dreading the most when we had to spring that on you. And look, nobody takes that exceptionally well, but you took it about as well as you could. And, look, we got there. And, I feel the same way, right? I think your team's had huge buy-in. You guys have a huge buy-in. We've had huge buy-in from our board, our investors, our team. And it worked out really well. And, a lot of the deal issues were just things outside of your control. But it's also a testament to when you're making deals, you're making them with people. You don't live in spreadsheets. They can help guide you. And PowerPoint presentations. And we really aligned on that early on. And it was always like, let's speak on everything on a human to human level. We understand that our interests are aligned on some things, not aligned on others. And let's just try and get it done. And we did.
Well, yeah, I mean, even on that note, we had a funny moment, I don't know, a little while ago, post-close, but just in the spirit of being candid, Tom calls me and goes, where the hell's all the money, man? And I go, what do you mean?
I didn't make that.
We're always profitable. And he goes, well, I don't see it. And I go, well, I don't have a P&L to look at because we're in the middle of a transition, but I'm looking at a bank statement. And you know what we did? We sat there on a call, and I took out a pen and I wrote on the back of an actual envelope on my dining room table and said, okay, AR is worth this. The balance sheet says we have this. These are our cost changes. And we did the math and left the call going, oh, we do have money. We just have a systems gap. And let's give it 2 weeks and let's let the math prove itself. And we did, and it was fine, right? But we've lived through plenty of those where, Tom, you made a comment in that process where you said, you go to business school and you get all these sophisticated tools and templates and strategies. And at the end of the day, you just end up talking to a guy you met on Reddit who's writing on an envelope using round numbers, trying to figure out where the money is, whatever that means, right? And we still figured it out. But I also think that leads us to a good kind of point in our discussion where, there's a contemplation of either the why or just the pros and cons, right? Of selling to a non-professional buyer who's not prepared to buy a business versus going to market, or whatever, selling to one of my PE groups or trying to warehouse the deal or whatever. And for us, beyond the shared vision, I think there was a long-term win here that was really attractive to me, right? So again, just to be real candid, I mean, if I retired, well, I'm not going to make any more buy-side fees. I'm not going to make a salary anymore. I'm not going to have any profit share. Okay, not the end of the world. If I keep owning and operating this business with our original partnership structure, super profitable, it's great. But I wanted to wind down soon, and my partner wanted to wind down soon. So then we end up with nothing, right? If one of us decides to quit one day. And now we have to either rebuild it, which I didn't feel prepared to do, or we have to leave with what we have. And in SourceCo's case, I'm really betting on and really excited about it becoming their responsibility as experts to close deals that I'll have rev share on for indefinitely, right? I mean, it's tied to my ownership, along with some structure for our deal, which we have some other rev share components to. But for me, the trade-off between continue to operate and not was really a trade-off of betting on me with no clear vision, with a partner and myself looking to sunset our day-to-day activities and having very little to show for it at that point. I mean, in that moment, obviously we have a lot to show for it over the life cycle of the business. Or bet on a team that's just getting going, that's proved their concept, that has a bunch of the core skill sets and expertise we don't have, and has a CEO that has that passion and that energy and, some years of youth on me to really go heads down on this. So in the end, I was just betting on, do I want to bet on myself now, a little rich, a little tired, a little picky about how I spend my time? Or do I want to bet on a hungry group that's proven themselves in phase one, that's looking to play a bigger game in phase two, built on top of the foundation that we've already built? And for me, that was a no-brainer, right? That wasn't about cash at close. That wasn't about the EBITDA multiple, which ultimately we ended up not really even tying to our transaction value. It was really about, in 5 years' time, where is the dividend coming from what I've built, right? And it will come from SourceCo, Captarget's partnership, GP Partners partnership at scale. And whether that lasts 5 years or 10 years or 15, like Captarget's lasted so far, I'd rather bet, my partner in Verde, John, says, all of us is smarter than one of us or some of us, right? And that's really what we're talking about here. I think we are worth more than the sum of our parts together than apart. And I'm willing to take a reduction in our earnings in the short term to have a smaller piece of a much bigger pie that's not labor reliant on me. And that was really my why, right? And I think that's penciling pretty well thus far.
Yeah, and I think, look, when my vision before I started SourceCo has always been that origination is basically lead generation, and that how private equity investment banks originate leads is highly outdated. And I think we've proven that, through content, through SEO, through AI SEO, through digital ads, we can create kind of an AI-driven inbound and outbound funnel. And then you want to be the best at then placing those leads with the right buyer for both the company owner and for us. And that really, for the company owner, I always say it's like about really understanding what they want out of a transaction, structure, valuation, ongoing role, and aligning them with, the buyers that make the most sense. And we wanted to be able to do both of those things, the lead generation and the pairing the deal with the buyer at scale. And we really believed AI and data were the central foundation to that. So when we'd met, we'd really just were finishing up a lot of the software in the back end that we'd spent the last year building to do that. And for me, it was an unbelievable opportunity to walk into an additional high volume lead source that creates more deals, puts more deals in our ecosystem, allows us to engage with buyers more on a fee only basis, which creates more retainers for both Captarget and SourceCo to fuel our marketplace, our remarketing tool. And it really was the idea of, we wanted this, this ecosystem where we're generating leads from inbound, from outbound, from partnerships. SourceCo has partnerships with investment banks, operators that funnel us deals all the time. And Captarget was a great additional lead source for us. So it was really exciting. And I think when we look at what we are building, it is that, Captarget stayed ahead of the curve on technology for a long time. And I think, that was what originally set you apart. And maybe as you spent less time working on it, you fell a little behind, partly because technology started changing so much faster. And we were able to now have a vehicle where we could apply a lot of what we've built and amplify your ability to serve your clients, to source more deals, to be a better kind of producer for the people that you work with. And for us, the data is so valuable. It was just such a unique opportunity. And I think now what we have is a really integrated group where we run off the same data warehouse, the same back-end functions, the automations and the AI and the reporting that we've built at SourceCo also help Captarget. And as an example of that, right, Captarget's the fastest growing group within Captarget was the cold calling, and they originally outsourced that. We've built a lot of what we call the AI enablement of our callers. That means that they don't take notes. AI listens to every call, auto updates to CRM. We rate 9 different parts of our call, from the opening and the closing to how they handle objections. We track those objections. We score every call, rate every seller interest. And we use that to train our team, to empower them to get better. And now we've brought all of Captarget's cold calling in-house. So we now have all of that applied to their team, and we get more data to train our whole team on and get better. So we really look at it now as that we have a great additional lead source and partner that allows us to get to market in a different way. We get to use more of the client, like we get to engage with more of the clients that we potentially talk to, because we have now this non-fee driven model, which again, SourceCo could never work with these people in a fee driven model, well, these types of buyers. So it's been really exciting for me, because I think so much of what we talked about in the kind of planning integration over the last 3 months has really come to fruition. And I think, now we're really in a place where we're focused on growth. How can we both grow the company from a revenue perspective, but also how can we grow our ability to service our clients? How can we grow our ability to service business owners and help them, achieve that liquidity event that many never thought was possible when they started their business?
Well, and for me, selfishly, it empowers me to focus on what's next for me, right? I mean, I'm making a meaningful sprint with our fund activity. We are, in the process of prepping to exit from the first fund we spun up. And I'm kind of leading the What's Next initiative, or at least meaningfully participating in the What's Next initiatives. And for me, there's this interesting natural evolution between what we saw at Captarget over these last some years and what I'm doing now. Once upon a time, we used to call sponsors with no money fundless sponsors, right? I know it's a little bit of a bad word now. Now they're independent or whatever. And I don't really care what we call them. But it was a little bit like redheaded stepchildy in the PE space for a while. But having worked with hundreds of them, I've learned what investable sponsor deals look like in real time, and doing those deals alongside the PE groups that were working with them. And it's become core to our strategy now, right? I mean, Verde basically exists to back sponsors, either as a co-sponsor or as a pure source of capital. But now, I really want to spend my time looking at deploying $150 to $300 million chunks of capital to back sponsor operators, right? Guys and gals who are going to be in the business executing primarily a roll-up strategy. And having access to Captarget's platform, some great buy-side functions as well, empowers us to be more than capital to these sponsors, right? Because capital has become kind of a commodity. I mean, sort of by definition, it kind of is. But I'd like to be more than that. LP capital, not just the cash in your pocket. So, I mean, we had a call yesterday with a group that is pitching us that I think we're going to be supportive of. And it's so nice to be able to say, this isn't just about capital. We can run your sourcing engine. We've got an AI execution team. We have in-house legal. We have principals who come from your space who are willing to work in the business with you. That's not like incredibly novel, but it's the minority of middle market PE investors. But more importantly, it's very close to my heart as an owner operator. So while it feels very different, allocating capital, running a fund, it's really a natural extension of what we've built here. And in a lot of ways, we still have the ball, right? Except now the ball is the deals and the capital.
Yeah.
And that's, now I have two of the balls. I don't know what kind of game we're playing anymore, but there's a couple balls on the court now. And this transaction, I think, is my fifth exit as a founder, something like that. And it further adds some notches in my belt as well, where when we're dealing with sponsors or sellers, I can really speak back to my comment about being on all sides of this weird shaped table. I can really speak to those folks because I've lived that experience. I've been that seller. I've lived through that earnout you didn't hit and that lawsuit you didn't know was coming and that group that overpromised and underdelivered, that group that was a great fit that made you a bunch of money. So when I think about what I'm doing now, I view it as a very natural extension. And, for those listening in our space, ultimately, who I want to connect with now moving forward are really those acquisition entrepreneurs, those operating partners who are looking to execute fast-paced roll-ups, who need at least $150 million of debt and equity, U.S.-based, and want a partner, co-sponsor, whatever the term you want, who is going to be providing a little more than just capital. And, we'd like to do 10 of those in the next 5 years. We should have 3 under our belts by the summer, so we're well on our way. But I'd like to deploy at least $1 billion in the operating sponsor space through that time horizon. And it all started here, learning about who those folks are, building those funnels here. And, just a funny full circle to Reddit, not to plug Reddit too hard, but the sponsor that we shipped an IOI to today, or a letter of support to today, freaking Reddit private equity.
Yeah.
Somebody posted, and I wrote back and said, hey, DM me, this sounds cool. Turns out, great track record, well qualified. They come from corporate. They've done 500 deals. These are high quality folks sitting there lurking on this subreddit asking 2-line questions about funding structuring. And if all goes well, I will be able to say I've sourced LPs, a buyer to my business, a sponsor to back, and team members, all from that same subreddit.
And I would echo what you said. I think, for us, one of the exciting things is as we get to, deeper into just the ecosystem, right? It's partnering with great operators, great entrepreneurs that want to grow. And this is a vehicle that we tend to do that we've never had. So to Gabe's point, if you are a great operator that's looking to find capital, is looking to find deals, definitely please reach out because we're really looking at growing those relationships. And it's been, for me, such a fantastic experience, getting to know you, getting to, treat you as a mentor to me. Besides just, telling me of which kind of sports cars I should get when I sell SourceCo eventually. I think it's great to have someone that's gone through that transition of all parts of the deal making process. And, just given my atypical, foray into the industry, it just resonated so much with me. And I'm just very appreciative of everything that we've got to build together to date and the team that you've cultivated at Captarget and GP Partners and Verde. And look to really excited to just keep kind of continuing the trajectory that we're on together.
Same, I always like to stress with all my businesses that this is a people play, right? Whether we're backing an operator, whether we're building a sourcing team, whether we're collaborating with our new corporate ownership, it's all about the humans sitting on the other side of the machines, at least for now. I think it will continue to be. And, the SourceCo team has really lived up to that. The Captarget team has persevered through a bumpy transaction and a bunch of growth and transition. Forever grateful to those folks. It's a really loyal, low turnover, I don't like to use the word family in a professional context, but very familiar, very friendly team of folks who have empowered and enabled all of this. So if there is a takeaway here beyond some of the technical stuff we've talked about, I mean, at the end of the day, it's about, as I always say, being an expert in something and having the right people with you to bring that expertise to market, right? And I think we've done a really good job at that.
Yeah, so I guess my final question to you is, and I appreciate all the kind words on our team as well, but my final question is, if Reddit Private Equity is the best subreddit, what's your second favorite subreddit?
I like some chaotic ones that are still in this same vein, right? Like, I like seeing what happens way down market, because with technology costs dropping, with the democratization of the playbook, the people that live in /buy a business, /business broker, /sell my business, that, not talking shit, but like, it's pretty goofy down there, right? I mean, it's a different thing. It's folks selling their laundromat, whatever. No shade, but it's a functionally different conversation. Those guys and gals are going to be the people in /private equity in 5 or 10 years, or maybe faster because of the technology acceleration. So I love to get way low in the market, way down market, in buying business.
We're going to see Gabe in Sell My Lemonade stand soon.
Yeah, I'm there. I just posted there a minute ago, not lemonade stand, but buy my business. And it was, somebody was asking a question about finding the right buy-side resource to buy like 300K SDE size companies, little companies. And, I mean, just a fun aside, the reality is they're not hard to find, but you're going to pay 15% of EV for your buy-side fee because they're going to have a 75K minimum. And if you're buying a $500,000 business, you're paying 15% or 14 some odd percent for your sourcing. And the SBA isn't going to allow that, right? So they're tackling some different problems over there, but it's interesting to see how they are coming up with solutions, because a lot of it is not just learning up market. A lot of these guys are just creating solutions themselves that are janky or not janky, but they tend to work, and I like to see it. So you can catch me on some of these down market subreddits and /what is it, because I like car spotting, and I like freaking out every time somebody posts a Shelby Cobra, a Pantera, or an Ineos Grenadier, because we should all know what those cars are by now and stop posting them on Reddit.
All right. Well, on that note, Gabe, I'll let you go about your day. So thank you so much for joining, and look forward to the next number of years together.
Likewise, Tom. Thanks so much.